All right, so we're going to go a quick run through of the optional test questions. I want to do this, as quickly as possible, um, well, at least making it clear what might apply to the AP exam. So, question one is Norway has the best quality of life for its citizens because it has. Answer is quality of life is real GDP per capita per person. So China has a greater output, real GDP, compared to Norway, obviously, but they also have 84 trillion people. So when you divide the total output of the economy by 84 trillion, it doesn't leave enough per person. So Norway, Sweden, uh, Canada are countries that have good total output per person. Okay, in terms of real GDP or total output, the U.S. is number one, China number two, Germany up there, Japan up there as well. Okay. Number two, which of the following will result in a decrease in U.S. GDP? Uh, for a decrease in real GDP is Europe goes into a recession. The answer is not consumers have good expectations because that would lead to more consumption and increase in GDP. Not the dollar becomes weaker, that leads to more exports, increase in GDP. Not improvements in technology that would increase short run aggregate supply, move the curve to the right, uh, and increase real GDP. I went like this, by the way, because I got this up here behind me. So I know this is my left. I'm watching you. All right, so if Europe goes into a recession, that's going to lead to less exports by the United States, decreasing GDP. Come on. Okay, I'm done. Technology. All right, number three. Which component of GDP is best for long run economic growth? Oh my gosh. Investment, 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 capital investment, capital investment, capital investment. That is what AP loves, loves, loves. Consumption helps in the short run. Increase in exports helps in the short run. Increase in government spending helps in the short run. Increase in investment helps in the short run and in the long run. And the things that help in the long run are the things best for long run aggregate supply. Okay. Okay. Which of the following is the best brief explanation of crowding out? Uh, Crowding out is increasing government spending, leading to more pressure and demand on the loanable funds market, increasing real interest rates, which will result in less consumption and investment. So government spending leading to higher interest rates is the brief answer. All right, the increase in government spending is $10 million, and the MPC is 0.8. What is the simple multiplier in the total change in GDP as a result of the increase in spending? Well, anytime you see MPC, MPS, you know you're going to get a multiplier situation. MPC 0.8, MPS 0.2, 1 over 0.2 is 5. And then what do we do with the multiplier? Multiply it times the big fat number. 5 times $10 million is $50 million. Which of the following will lead to an overall lower price level? So going through the answers, improvements in technology. Okay, so of the answers that we have here. So improvements in technology are going to shift our short run aggregate supply curve this way, bringing down the price level. If there's expansionary monetary policy, that's going to lead to a higher price level. A weakening of the dollar, that's going to lead to a higher price level. And a labor shortage is going to cause stagflation and cause a higher price level. Okay, so we got that one. Oh, I skipped a question. Uh, Number 5, sorry. If the nominal GDP is $10 trillion and the price index, or CPI, consumer price index, is 200, then the real GDP will equal nominal GDP divided by the deflator, gives us real GDP. So the nominal GDP is 10 trillion divided by 2. The deflator is 200 divided by 100. The deflator is 2. Remember, the deflator should be a small number. They're usually going to give you big, round numbers. So 200, maybe 50 is a price index, maybe something like 80, maybe 150. And then the deflator is 0.8 if it's 80, 1.5, okay, if it's 150. All right, so the real GDP would be 5 trillion, 10 trillion divided by 2. If the U.S. decides to make a priority of balancing the budget and creating a budget surplus, which policy will solve that problem? That's contractionary fiscal policy. All right, balancing the budget, that's about fiscal policy, not monetary policy. And contractionary monetary policy, spend less, tax more, and never get elected. The long run Phillips curve is equal to the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, and the natural rate of unemployment is frictional plus structural. Okay, so be able to take that 2 steps. First step, knowing long run Phillips curve is the natural rate of unemployment. Second step, knowing the natural rate of unemployment equals frictional plus structural. The short run Phillips curve is the inverse relationship between inflation and unemployment. Okay, straightforward, we should know that. Which of the following will lead to stagflation? Okay, well, increase in government spending, no. More technological advances, no. An increase in corporate taxes, yes. Increase in corporate taxes is going to stunt investment and spending to produce things by companies. So increase in corporate taxes is most likely to lead to stagflation. Which of the following is contractionary monetary policy? Now, really important, AP is likely to try to mix in fiscal versus monetary policy. So I'm not going to go through the answers because that involves going to another screen. But contractionary monetary policy, Fed sells bonds. Fed raises the discount rate. Fed raises the reserve requirement. Okay, those are contractionary monetary policies. All right, the government increases taxes by $25 billion. The MPC is 0.9. Okay, got an MPC, MPS. They talked about taxes. We've got to use the tax cut multiplier, which is always 1 less than the simple multiplier. Well, the simple multiplier would be 1 divided by 0.1 or 10, which means that the tax cut multiplier would be 9. Okay, but they said they increased taxes. So if they increase taxes, that is going to decrease GDP. So if they decreased or increased taxes by $25 billion, 9 times 25, last time I checked, is 225. There'll be a decrease in GDP, maximum possible decrease. Don't let that word confuse you. Okay, they just have to put that in there because that doesn't really happen in the world. It's the one thing I wish I didn't have to teach. Hey, why don't you teach something that never happens? Let's do that. I would actually, teaching about Cinderella would actually be more valuable because somewhere in the world at some point somebody lost their slipper and somebody found it and it ended up being a great guy, right? That probably happened. It never, ever happened that the multiplier effect happened to its maximum. The economy is in a recession and the government is not going to intervene. Which curve will shift in which direction to bring the economy back to long-run aggregate supply? All right, I have this set up in a recession. The short-run aggregate supply is going to shift to the right, okay, because of lower costs of labor, lower costs of commodities and oil, and lower inflationary expectations. Short-run aggregate supply shifts to the right. Okay, if it's an expansion, then short-run aggregate supply shifts to the left because of higher costs of labor, higher costs of commodities, and higher inflationary expectations. Number 15, which of the following is not a part of GDP? I don't know what I have here for the possible answers. I gotta look at it. Boeing exports planes to Mexico, yes. John gets a haircut and pays $20 at Supercuts, yes. The government gives each American a $1,200 stimulus check, no. Okay, there's no purchase of a good or anything. It's just we're giving you money. Okay, so if my mom gives me a $1,200 check, right? That's not part of GDP, right? A farmer buys a tractor for $65,000. Just for the record, I have no idea how much a tractor costs. Probably costs more than that. You know, a garbage truck that goes through the alleys is worth like $1.5 million. You didn't know the garbage truck driver is like driving a car more expensive than a Maserati. Probably has something to do with the huge crushing device on there. Nummer Sechsen, which is number 16 in German. Mr. Gallo purchases a newly built home in Chicago as part of GDP. Does that go under investment? Right? If I purchase a home from somebody else that's lived in it, that is not part of GDP. 17, which of the following will not necessarily increase long-run aggregate supply? So remember, long-run aggregate supply, things that change that are investment, technology, education, healthcare, infrastructure improvements, but consumption does not. You'd think like, oh, consumption, that's good for the economy. That does not necessarily help things in the long run. Infrastructure helps, improvements in healthcare, healthier diets, exercise, and then of course, capital equipment investment, which is AP's favorite thing in the world. If you ever run into an AP question writer, just say, capital investment, yeah. They'll love you. If the nominal interest rate is 6% and the inflation rate is 3%, then the real interest rate equals, remember, real interest rate equals nominal minus the rate of inflation, so that would just be 3%. What type of rate is the loanable funds rate and why? It's a real interest rate because of the length of time that people have loans out. The Fed funds rate is a nominal rate because that's an overnight rate and there's very minimal inflation that takes place there. According to the crowding out process, real interest rates will increase. What do I have for the other? Okay. Real interest rates will increase and lead to a decrease in consumption and investment, right? More government spending crowds out consumption and investment. Okay. Number 21. If the reserve requirement is 10%, then a Federal Reserve purchase of $10 billion in bonds will increase the money supply by a maximum of how much? Well, the money multiplier is 1 divided by the reserve requirement. If the reserve requirement is 10%, 1 divided by 10% is 10. 10 times the $10 billion bond purchase is $100 billion. Okay. Now, this is different. If the person deposits $2,000 in cash to a bank that has a 20% reserve requirement. What's the maximum change in the money supply? That's different because the $2,000 cash is already in the money supply. So 1 over the reserve requirement, 1 over 20% is 5. 5 times 2,000 is 10,000. But I have to subtract out the $2,000 in cash because that was already in there. So the change in the money supply would be 8,000. I would say they're likely to ask a question like that because it's hard and it involves math. I'm expecting them to have a lot of math calculation problems. Why? It's going to be hard to cheat on those, okay? Because they aren't stupid. Well, yeah, I'll repeat that. They aren't stupid. I might be thinking something different at this moment, but they know that it's going to be a lot harder to cheat if you have to do an actual math calculation as opposed to, texting a friend or something like that. Please don't do that, okay? Please take the exam with integrity, all right? You can have notes out and have everything laid out for you, which I recommend, but don't communicate with anybody. It's tantamount to stealing, especially if you get a 5, and you probably would have got a 5 anyway, right? So don't cheat. And I got this one wrong. The rate at which banks borrow money from the Federal Reserve is known as the discount rate. The rate at which banks borrow from one another is the federal funds rate. Don't worry about if you see prime rate on there or any other thing. Not that they have multiple choice, but don't concern yourself with other rates. Know the difference between those two. Which of the following is the best description of full employment in the economy? Well, it's not all people are working. Full employment might be 5% unemployment. Full employment means no cyclical unemployment. So if there's structural and frictional unemployment, you're still at full employment. Okay. If there are this, a lot of people got wrong. If there are 1 million discouraged workers that become hopeful about finding a job and begin searching for work, what will happen to the unemployment rate? I could go into the math about this. All it is the discouraged workers were not part of the labor force. So they aren't part of the equation. Once they start looking for work, they now become unemployed. They become part of the numerator and the denominator, and that percentage creeps up. So in Donald Trump, the unemployment rate was 3.5%, and it creeped up to 3.7%. That's because discouraged workers started looking for work. The opposite is true. When the economy is terrible, right, and the unemployment rate's 10%, it might creep down to 9.5% because people stop looking for work and become discouraged workers. They're out of the labor force, no longer unemployed. Okay, so I would expect them to maybe even have a math problem in that regard. Which of the following will not increase if there are improvements in production technology? Okay. New technology is going to shift aggregate supply, short-run aggregate supply to the right, which is going to increase real GDP. It's going to increase employment. It's going to increase income. It's going to increase output, but price level is going to go down. Okay. All right. Remember, employment, income, and output, EIO. Come on, Fenwick. Let's go. Boom. Yeah. All right. All right. So EIO. Employment, income, and output. Notice this is not unemployment, it's employment. If the economy is moving this way, that's good for getting a job, how much money you make, and how much the economy is producing. Okay, if the economy is moving that way, okay, I'm going to lose my job, they're going to take away my lunch benefits, and we're going to produce less. Okay. Uh, if an economy is in equilibrium, what effect will a natural disaster like a hurricane have on the short run Phillips curve? A natural disaster is going to create stagflation, okay, which on this graph, the shift short run area is applied to the right. So on here, the short run Phillips curve is going to shift up and to the right. All right, which this is Jimmy Carter, Richard Nixon, and sad to say now Donald Trump. Okay. All right. A balance sheet for Breakpoint Bank has a demand deposits of $10,000. The loans that it has issued are $5,000. If the reserve requirement is 20%, then how much excess reserves does Breakpoint have? If the reserve requirement is 20% and their deposits are $10,000, there's $2,000 required reserves. The loans are $5,000. That leaves $3,000 left for excess reserves. I'm at 21 minutes here, running out of time. Musketeer Bank has the following balance sheet. Demand deposits of $25,000, required reserves $2,500, excess reserves $3,500, loans $19,000. If somebody deposits $4,000, what will be the required reserves? The required reserves, if somebody deposits 4,000, did I do this wrong on the test? Oh, you have to figure out the required reserves are 10%, because the required reserves are 2,500 and the deposits are 25,000. So since you know that, if there's a deposit of 4,000, there'll be an additional required reserves of $400. The new balance for required reserves is 2,900. And last but not least, which of the following will also lead to an appreciation of the US dollar? And the Fed raising interest rates, okay, is going to lead to an appreciation of the US dollar. It looks like currency market and foreign exchange is not going to be on the AP exam, but it's still important to me, especially in the global economy that we have. So just something to know, and it certainly can help you, especially when talking about exports and imports and that kind of stuff. All right, I'm going to post some more stuff, mostly micro stuff today. But that's a quick run through. And if you have any questions about anything, email me. I can't promise you. I'm spinning like a top here, trying to keep things going. You know, my daughter just moved to Montana for the summer, which is an exciting but traumatic thing for me as a father. I'm very happy that there's like 4 people in Montana with the coronavirus. So, and I think a bear. But I think if you meet a bear, you got bigger problems than the coronavirus.